The show is The Drawn Word. My name is Chris Irving, and the place is here in New York City. Our guest tonight is a comic book staple, a very, very influential and legendary writer who brought the X-Men to life in the 1970s through the mid-90s. Yes, Chris Claremont will be with us. We'll see you soon. Good evening. We are here with Chris Claremont, the godfather of X-Men. Is that a good title? How do you refer to your role in X-Men lore?
I don't. I just walk in and, yeah, it's all mine, so what?
Yeah, I'm the dude who wrote the comics, and you move on.
Maybe a little more expansive than that, but...
So I do have to ask, because you didn't start the new X-Men, but that was Len Wein. Mm-hmm. How did you inherit it, and what do you feel you brought to the game?
You have to take a giant step back, further. When I first went to work for Marvel in 1968 as a gopher, one of the first books that came into the house while I was there was the sequence of X-Men by Roy Thomas and Neil Adams. So, in a weird, slightly twisted, almost perverse sort of way, the X-Men and I have been hanging out together for quite a while. And that's essentially when I fell in love with the characters and the concept. Because as the young punk in the office, I had to deal with the fan mail, which was actually written mail as opposed to digital, coming in and people saying, "What have you done to my X-Men? This is not Werner Roth. This is awful. These people with big hair and bodies with shape." They were impassioned in their own way. So I had to answer, do the letter columns and send some replies out. So I was sort of tied into it whether I liked it or not. So when I came back 5 years later as an editorial assistant, as Len's assistant editor, he and Dave Cockrum were already hammering it together. Marvel, the sales on Roy and Neil's issues were spectacular at the time, but by the time Marvel found out what they were, Neil had been off the book for 6-7 months.
Wow. Because,
well, these were the days when you found out from actual sales, not from orders. So you got the hard numbers something like 6 or 7 months after the issue went on sale, which was too late to do anything to correct it, as usual. So they let it slide for a while, putting out reprints and guest appearances to see if there really was interest in the concept. And finally, in 74, 75, they decided to relaunch it. Roy's idea was to change the concept slightly and make it a more international team, because even then we were thinking of, well, we have a US market, but maybe there's a global market, well, at least in England anyway, that we can exploit somehow. And that was why we pulled in Ororo and Colossus and Nightcrawler. Wolverine as a token Canadian. And Dave did the designs, Len structured it out, and I'm sitting in at my desk outside his office listening to all of this and going absolutely bug-brained, because Len is a brilliant writer, and he's working with Dave, the lucky son of a gun. I mean, Dave was at the height of his ability then. He'd just come off the Legion of Superheroes, which was an incredibly, for the fan geeks of the day, an incredibly brilliant visual portrayal. I mean, he had like 40 characters to play with from different cultures, different physiognomies. Some were human, some were humanoid, some were forget about it. And he made it all look attractive. They're putting together the X-Men, and I'm sneaking outside the door and listening, and tossing in my 2 cents worth whenever Len left an opening. So actually, in the giant size, the disposal of the island of Krakoa is mine. I mean, how do we get rid of this island? Well, cut it off at the roots and let it fly out into space. You know, you forget that the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, not to mention moving around the solar system at, I don't know, however many thousands of miles an hour or a day. So Len took the idea, and shortly thereafter he went off, he decided to go freelance, and he took as his assignment the top 4 titles Marvel had, Spider-Man, Hulk, the FF, and something else. And he didn't have enough writing time, he felt, to be able to handle the X-Men, which was a bi-monthly. So he asked me if I would be willing to do it. And not knowing any better and loving the opportunity of working with Dave, I said, hell yes.
And what I've noticed in talking with you before is you get to talking about the characters, and you start talking as if you're that character and how they would think and feel and act. And you went to Bard College for acting, so you having an acting background. And I always felt
also political theory background, I should point out.
Oh, that's right. Yes, political theory as well. How much of that acting background do you feel was at play in writing X-Men and crafting these characters?
It's not so much. Well, partly it's the ability to try to put yourself in different shoes. How would Scott react to a situation? How would Peter react? How would Kurt react? How would Jean react? How would Aurora react? And then the way you work in the so-called Marvel method is you're structuring out a sequence of events and presenting them to the penciler in a way that enables him to visualize those events and how you go from page 1 to page 18 or 22, depending on the size of the issue. But to do it in a way that presents the characters in circumstances that are fun to draw, exciting to draw, and also visually enticing to read. I mean, it would be the equivalent of you're trying to structure out a film in a way that utilizes all the assets you have available, the actors, the camera, the lens, the how you want to shoot things, which, I mean, if you're going to set a story in Monument Valley, for example, you're not going to shoot a rostrum camera shot. That's an environment that's built for 70 millimeter. You want widescreen, you want that depth of field, you want the audience to sit there and see the characters, but in a perspective, so that if you're watching the Searchers, you'll have close-ups. But then when you've got John Wayne and Ward Bond and the Rangers riding down the valley, and they suddenly realize Indians to the right of us, so the camera kind of pans up, and Indians to the left of us, and there are more Apaches on the other side, and then the camera just backs up, and you have this beautiful shot of the Rangers in the middle, and Indians on both sides, and the sense of, oh, they are in such trouble now. But it's creating a collective sense of excitement, of place, of people, of drama, that if you just did it in a series of isolated quick cuts that are focused in on a character, the rationale might be the story is about the character, you want to keep the image on the character, but at the same time you're losing all the other possible tools that are available. And to me, that it's always been, if you're working with a Dave Cockrum or a John Byrne or a Walt Simonson or a Salvador La Roca, you don't want to just lock it into one character in a frame. You want to give them a chance to play. You want to take a Michael Golden, and case in point, in the Avengers Annual we did, he and I did, there's a throwaway, and it is a total throwaway scene, where a secondary character is walking into a hospital. Now, she's a detective. In the background, you see a uniformed cop, a priest, it's like a bad joke, a nurse, a mom, and a kid. And they have nothing to do with the scene. They're just there. And I look at the panel, and it's the top of the page. It goes across the entire top of the page. It's a wide-angle shot. And I just thought, oh, this is ridiculous. You can't put characters that interesting in the frame and not do anything with it. So I came up with just a quick throwaway exchange of dialogue. Who are you? Well, my name's Maddie. I was sick, but I got better. Well, we'll look after you now. And for the next 20 years, people, is that Madeline Pryor? But if that's Madeline Pryor, how come she's a little kid when we last saw her as a pilot, a passenger on a 747? Wow, through the magic of comics.
Yeah.
Maybe something weird's going on.
Oh.
But to me, the ability to just pluck a moment like that and throw it out there and let it cogitate for umpty-bump years, that's the fun. I mean, when I was reading the FF as a kid, Jack would do this scene where you have two cops, or a cop and a fireman looking up at Galactus standing next to the Baxter building, and the cop, has got this big gun, and the radio cameraman is like got his stuff, and what do you think's going to happen? I don't know. You think the world's going to come to an end? I don't know. You think the FF will save us? I sure hope so. Yeah. I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with the story per se, but it's such a cool book. Yeah, this is the real world with real people in it. On one level, you look at Thor just got into a taxi cab. Wow, that is so silly. This is that kind of city. You have no idea who you're going to run into.
I have to ask you, going from the real world to the totally make-believe world. You just recently...
Which is which?
Which is which, yes. The red pill or the green pill, or was it the blue pill? I can't remember. I never really got through that movie.
Especially if you're colorblind.
Oh, I am actually, just a little bit. You have a story in the new John Carter anthology, Under the Moons of Mars, and you're a little familiar with John Carter as a writer. What was it like to revisit John Carter's world?
Well, it's actually funnier than you think, because when I was originally doing this series for Marvel, I was writing it in 12-issue arcs. So it'd be a year for a story, because I figured it's John Carter. You tell novels. You don't do one-shots. And it was also, one of them was the second professional sale that Frank Miller did, with Tars Tarkas fighting an evil Thark. But I had plans for the next arc, which was going to be John Carter and Dejah Thoris and Tars Tarkas finding themselves transported to Arizona. in 1877, and getting all caught up in the Apache Wars with Cochise and Tom Jeffords, real people, by the way, and the end of the first wars and the beginning of the fights with Geronimo and the like. But the series got canceled, so I took the files, my notes, and the stories and stuck them in a drawer, and they sat there for years and years and years and years and years until finally I got this call. Well, we're doing this Barsoom anthology. You have a story that happens to be you're interested in writing? And oddly enough, well, yes, I do. So what you've got is the Ark, John Carter and Dejah Thoris and Taras Tarkas, go to Arizona, chapter 11. So we're coming in the middle of the novel, basically, where we've already dealt with such things as how can Dejah Thoris walk on Earth because it's heavy, it's a bigger planet than her own, and she would be weighed down by gravity. I figured Taras Tarkas could adapt fairly easily since he's a Thark and giant to begin with. Dejah Thoris would have to evolve into it, but over the course of time that would work. And they would be there for the better part of a year. And then the MacGuffin of the short story and indeed of the overall novel is they're not the first. So it's a fairly interesting story.
And actually, mentioning your old papers, it's the final question. We're going to have to wrap it up soon. You just made it huge.
I talk too much.
You told me once you talk as you write by the word. Or
paid by the word. I talk like someone who's paid by the word.
Paid by the word.
It's always a problem.
So speaking of many words, you donated a huge amount of files and papers to Columbia University.
Pretty much everything.
Everything, like even going back to pre-X-Men days.
Going back to high school.
Wow.
No, this is my entire oeuvre.
That's going to clear a lot of space out.
Of the basement, yeah, but my office was already, you'd be amazed at how much clobber there is. The fact is that I've had too many flooded basements and I've lost too many valuable comics, and I would hate to have the original source material because a lot of this stuff predates computers. So while you have the illusion that your files are safe when they're on disk, except for the fact that you may have put them on disk 10 years ago and the disk technology that existed 10 years ago is no longer readable today.
Yeah.
Which is a real annoyance. The hard copies fade, and they need, these are all my notebooks, all my first drafts, second drafts, third drafts. Wow. My first novel was when it was a totally different concept and got totally rewritten. And
they'll be in the archives forever. But thank you so much for coming, and it's always...
The pleasure was mine. Forgive me for being such a total blabbermouth.
That's fine. Thanks, Chris.